Welcome again to the second part of the fifth lecture. So that's the 10th lecture in the series of the Grace Machine, with the title Medium. So the first part was with the title Media. It sounds a bit cheeky, but there is a strong relationship between the notion of a media, which doesn't mediate in the proper sense because the medium was the message. So we got something similar here. There's this numbing effect. What was it? According to Virilio, the subliminal comfort, and for McLuhan it was numbing and narcosis and Narcissus, and for Butler it was a form of the unconscious. So what we're going to trace is that this effect of extension, has a mimetic effect in the other direction. So from the position of this diminution of consciousness, there's actually a position possible on that other side, that position of absorption and absorptive mimesis, which we already encountered in Virilio, and a stronger version of that in Flusser, which is one of, as well as bliss, as one of terror, in the sense of, we saw bliss with Prince Mishkin, with his epileptic grand mals, and we saw the spectral image of the White Lady of Bernadette Soubirous. And of course, we saw this bioluminescent creature of the octopus, or the vampire squid of Willem Flusser. So we're interested in this prosthetic mimetic loop, and we're going to look like from that other side, and that actually will engulf us in a completely different world, and a very strange world, and a very unexpected world, in the sense that it's not very often that you see a media theory connected to psychotropics, and certainly not to a surrealist interpretation of Art Nouveau. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go to this beautiful article by André Breton from 1933 in the famous journal published by Skira in Paris between, 1933 probably, and just before the Second World War, 1939 probably. And I think this article is from the third and fourth, a double publication of Minotaur. Minotaur, that was the name, Minotaur, a surrealist journal, by André Breton, who wrote for this journal very often. On the right, you see the original, Le Message Automatique, and on the left, the English translation, the automatic message. Why is this so important for us? Well, for many reasons. Of course, the automatic message is a sort of step beyond the paradigm of McLuhan. The medium is the message. It sort of takes all the consequences of that notion of McLuhan. The medium is the message, and starts to almost position the viewer in the screen itself. And that's, of course, that's what the bioluminescent octopus does. This sort of becoming screen, and I think that's also this idea of André Breton. It's not like it all ends with the narcosis of the media. No, it's from that point of numbness, what Virilio calls subliminal comfort, that it's that all things transform and change, and we start to project new images. And I think that's the power of André Breton's message. It's actually structured as a text on Art Nouveau. So let's make that clear immediately. there's not a lot of theory, and especially not a lot of good and interesting theory of Art Nouveau. We will discuss Walter Benjamin, who was very ambiguous about Art Nouveau and who will criticize very harshly. And then there's Dolf Sternberger, who is not translated, who wrote a beautiful book titled Über Jugendstil. Of course, Art Nouveau is the French and English name for the style, and then Jugendstil is the German one, and the Spanish one is modern style, which we'll also see from Salvador Dali. But it is this creature of the octopus that is so important to André Breton. We are following it in the English translation. What is Art Nouveau, if not an attempt to generalize and adapt mediumistic drawing, painting, and sculpture to the art of furniture and decoration? Now, mediumistic drawing, that's directly translated from the French, is what we would call automatic drawing. So it's a form of self-hypnosis that allows you. So you take that position of the narcotic, or you take that position of sleep, or dreaming, or reverie, daydreaming. But it's deeper than daydreaming. It's a lower state of consciousness that then allows you to draw, or sometimes write, or talk to spirits. I mean, it's quite something. At the bottom you see already, like Hélène Smith, the medium from the late 19th century, Victoria Sardou, who made a lot of automatic drawings. He's even like quoting from Bernard Palissy, who was a 16th century ceramic artist, beautiful work. Léon Petitjean also making automatic drawings. So he's immediately, they're actually, I mean, surrealism in that sense is really the theory of Art Nouveau. During Art Nouveau itself, there's not a lot of proper theory about Art Nouveau. There's a lot of writing, obviously, that we know from people like Huysmans or Oscar Wilde, both in aestheticism and the later sort of the decadent period where death is so prominent. But there's not a lot of proper theory of Art Nouveau, and I think surrealism in that sense is really one of its major theoreticians, especially André Breton, later also Salvador Dali. Let's look at what he says. He's actually he's making the argument of some kind of a number of stylistic properties of Art Nouveau that are so close to what you see in automatic drawing: dissimilarity of details, incapacity for repetition. There's a whole list of types of attributes and characteristics of type of drawing, and then he comes to this figure. It is thus possible to affirm that both efforts are conceived under the same sign. He calls it a sign, not a figure, which might well be that of the octopus with its silky glands, as Lautréamont put it. Plastically, both efforts represent in every characteristic the triumph of ambiguity interpretively. Both represent, even in the most insignificant aspect, the triumph of complexity. So it is the octopus with this beautiful idea of the silky glands. Often it's translated by silky gaze, which is probably a bit better. And that I think that's quite correct. So it's not just the octopus as the mollusk in its extreme softness and its bioluminescence and its tentacles. This extremely limbed creature, where the limbs have a separate consciousness. No, it's also this silky gaze, and that's really this idea that he connects to a form of well, we would call it not seeing, a form of not seeing, or an internal seeing. Maybe that's the right word. So it's not just looking out. And of course we learned that many, many years after André Breton, is that it's actually not the eyes that see. Of course they do see, but not that they define the screen of its skin, because the skin is really a screen. A radiant screen, a bioluminescent screen, and that makes the eye silky, some kind of form of not really seeing or seeing a beyond, and that's a very interesting understanding. So we moved from media all the way to numbness and narcosis, and we went underwater where there was so much light, and then we entered, we encountered this figure of Willem Flusser, the vampire squid, and we had this beautiful expose of Peter Gottfried Smith on the screen, the screen skin of and its consciousness of the octopus, and that now becomes this figure of the medium water, this a very specific world. Let's just look again at this understanding of this underwater world by Willem Flusser. The space is not a lethargic and passive expanse supported by a Cartesian endoskeleton. That's not there. It's rather a realm of coiled tension laden with energy that has been banished from its snail shell. Its geometry therefore corresponds to what we call dynamics. According to its thinking, for instance, the shortest distance between 2 points is not a straight line, but a coil spring, etc., etc. So it's a form of detouring, and this indirectness of seeing, and on the right we see illustration. There's a number of illustrations which are not in the English translation of Breton's text, the automatic message, but they are in the original French. There's a number of those, and this is a dessin automatique. An automatic drawing, and you see that coiling world, and you see it's not just a single coil or scroll in the ornamental sense. You see numbers of those, and I think actually he is referring to that quite directly, André Breton, and we see sort of a multi-central world. We see coiling, and we see connections between points, but not in the sense of a network. So we see these contractions, expansions, coiling in and out, and then jumping over to another center, and another center, and another center, all intersecting with each other. And I think that's quite a perfect image of this geometry that Flusser is trying to indicate. It's not just a world of points connected by lines, so it's not a networked world, and it's certainly not a Cartesian world where points are set in a grid and then created by verticals and linked by verticals and horizontals. It's this. They are centers, but they are centers of intensity, centers of contracting and expanding, spiraling in and out. It's really a world of detours, and things are never directly connected. I think that's the way of putting it. Everything is connected by detours. So it's an extremely warped world, and in that sense, that it's not a medium that is which you would think, like if you get underwater, because we are now in the world of a submerged world, is where everything would be linked in a sort of neutral, generalized manner. But it's the completely reverse of that. It's a multi-centered world, and we have more drawings of André Breton's texte, Portrait d'esprit revêtu de leur costume fluidique. So that what is that? A portrait of spirits dressed in their fluid costumes. It's what we would call a psychedelic drawing. But psychedelic would be that it's induced by psychotropics. So and we will be looking at those at drawings made under the influence of mescaline, for instance, by Henri Michaud. But that's so much later. This is 1911. So this is really a drawing made while probably during a séance. I'm not sure if it's with multiple people, but certainly connecting to spirits. Often these type of draftsmen are people that often have connections with the same spirit. And I'm trying to take this as serious as I possibly can. It's not a question of you believe in spirits. It's really, it's much more about the construct. And I'm also always interested in the construct, because that's what the Grace Machine is about. It's about how you construct this thing. And again, we see multiple centers. We see sort of seeds. We see sort of points where things eject from, but in a sort of liquid manner. And it's not this a way of points like radiating out and then finding each other like stars. These are much more like a fluid points, and while they expand again. So there's many branching. You see sort of petal typology. You see like little like figures, slightly asymmetrical figures, and they seem to be flourishing and blooming, and then they dissolve again, and you get a sort of this nested pattern. But there is a connection of liquidity and light. Of course, in psychedelics, these would be extremely colored. It would be an interesting exercise to use color for this one. But it's this idea of spirits being dressed. I think that's really the most important. It's not like spirits are just like apparitions. It is a form of dressing, and we saw the same with the White Lady. So it's not a form of pure light. It's light and liquidity that sort of creates this system. So I think for the notion of floating and being underwater, being submerged, and then starting to see sort of spectral images, this going in the reverse direction, right? So not from one point extending to the other, but really from that point of absorption and numbness back into that spectral image. So that's really the construct that we're trying to follow, and in that sense, it's really important to understand what the role is of this liquidity in Art Nouveau. It's often been mentioned, and we see two of the main sort of designers of Art Nouveau on the left. Victor Horta, a French-speaking Belgian architect. We're talking about the early 1890s. Hotel Tassel in Brussels. On the right, the famous metro entrances of Hector Guimard in Paris. It's really horrible to just think, like, I think there were over 50 of them, and there's only a few that are, of course, in the modernist rage against ornament, and especially against Art Nouveau, sort of killed off and demolished. It's too horrible to mention. Demolished all these subway entrances. But there are two states of liquidity. So one is the interior world of the house. Dolf Sternberger, one of the theoreticians of Art Nouveau, actually said that the single family home is really the characteristic design object of Art Nouveau, and I think that's completely correct. Art Nouveau, though it's a form of Gothic, we have to discuss that also. It is absolutely coming out of the Gothic revival of the mid-19th century, and especially in England, but also in France. And in that form of Gothic, it went so far. It went so far with its craftsmanship and its relying on craftsmanship and also on its ornamentation, that it's almost a world that intensifies and doesn't really sort of want to address the larger projects. Also because it's an architecture of the bourgeoisie, which was a critical point for Walter Benjamin, but not for us. So it is that individual home and not say a larger bank building or church. There's no Art Nouveau church, or there's no Art Nouveau skyscraper. What a pity! But many houses, and every time you visit such a house, it's quite strong in its sense that you get the feeling of being submerged, and so you're floating, obviously, and the tendrils go in many directions. It's almost like the Gothic, where the Gothic starts to like bend and spread out and interlace with each other. It's almost like these connections have been cut, as if they're like not the hard stalks of the Gothic, but they're more like plastic, and they start to like interlace with each other in a completely different way, in a much more chaotic way of tendrils. It's quite obvious on the left, so we get this underwater world. So it's a very, very late Gothic in that sense, and it's also Gothic. It is a very spiritual, but in a different way than the Gothic. And on the right we see another liquidity that's one of the cast iron. I think that's really important to say. So on the left we have water as a medium, and on the right we have liquid iron as a medium. It's not steel. Steel is really a modernist material, but we have liquid iron. Often you can see also wrought iron, but that's something else. Wrought iron is something for a blacksmith, and we see some of it on the left. That's actually wrought iron. So we have strips of metal or plates of metal that are then worked by craftsmen. On the right we actually see something that's far more complex and industrial, because it works with molding techniques, which we will be discussing. But there is this liquidity of the iron that is really exceptional if you compare to other architectural styles, because you will hardly ever see, and we didn't really see it very often before either, of what the properties are of cast iron. So two forms of liquidity. And I think I need to say, already, that there is, because of course within the idea of André Breton and also with Salvador Dali, we will be stressing this idea of extreme weakness and extreme softness of Art Nouveau and its shapes. And it's true, that's correct, that's absolutely correct, and it does sort of mentally, spiritually identify with that liquidity, with that sort of dream world. But we should never forget that the success of Art Nouveau is not just its tendrils, it's actually it's vertical. So we often call it the whiplash figure. And that's a very suiting name, because a whiplash has a sort of a thicker side on one end where you hold it, and that's really the vertical. And we go vertically up, and then it slowly sort of starts to like curve in many directions, and that becomes a tendril. So there's no proper opposition between structure and ornament, but there's two sides to it, and I think that really makes Art Nouveau so successful, because it can actually manage lampposts and railings and columns that we see all over here, but also, let's say, the edges of books and lots of book covers, the edges of posters and advertising elements, which were analyzed by Walter Benjamin as a sign of modernity. But that's true. And of course a lamppost here. you see it on the edges of other door frames, the table legs, the legs of chairs. So there is always this vertical, and this vertical allows them to sort of create arrays and have a sort of serial setup of it, almost like a loom. Almost like a loom in that sense, and that vertical is always present. So before we're starting to look at the other end, right, at the tendrils that then also have a structural relationship, we should not forget. I mean, it looks like, there's all these intersections between the curves are like completely accidental. But that's a mistake. That you will actually see that a lot of these tendrils make very smart connections, either by merging or by intersecting or by bouncing off. Or you see actually a few of those examples on the left in that wrought iron. These wrought iron figures in the railing, and. That's important. So before we're going to stress sort of all this tendrilism, and we should understand that Art Nouveau's expertise is really in the managing of frames as well. Now you're going to look at these two different worlds. One of water plants, a sort of submerged world of dreaminess, a world of floating, obviously. A world of nymphs. There's always a lot of water spirits in Art Nouveau, and these spirits come from like every object, every vase, every doorknob, every door frame. You'll always see like young maidens. Well, let's call them maidens because that's a word from that period. So that's a world that allows them to sort of evoke those. And we are not seeing the roots of those plants. Don't forget, they're actually going to the ground in the bottom of the pond. And then on the right we see cast iron, or we actually see a mold. I think in this case a mold of compressed sand. And then with that liquid glowing iron, it's obviously an image that somebody like Hephaestus would love. But we have to understand how that works. It's often a lost wax method, so it's a very sculptural technique, which is, and the sculptures are often derived from drawings. So we get the drawings, and then we get the sort of the artisan that makes. Like physical plaster models of those drawings that are like completely three-dimensional, or that are like in relief in different heights. And then we get a plaster cast, and the plaster cast gives us a hollow shape. It gives us a hollow shape, and it's broken, then the pieces are put back together again. Then we add like a wax, and we get a layer of wax, which is like 4 or 5 millimeters, depending on what you pour in. Then we put clay in there, then we break away the mold, and then we replace it, and we get the cast iron. We take the sand away, and then we get the shape. So there's a lot of exchange of liquidity, of plaster, of iron, and of wax, and so it's a very intense relationship, a very interactive relationship between this material, which is made of light. I have to stress that it's really the glowing forge of Hephaestus, and it is making of transforming from light to form, and how it then displaces and melts the wax and sort of enters the hollow form. And this hollow form is a matrice, a matrix, a mother mold, and it's like a womb. It's a hollow shape, and that's really the power of Art Nouveau. This sort of technological transformation of the image into a form via this light material transformation. It's not as simple as it looks, just like a pouring of shape. It's highly technological, and it's really a technology that sort of moves from art into the larger production methods of architecture. I think that's also important to say. It's not just singular objects, it's really like a whole series of objects and an understanding of how that meets sort of the demands of a more complex society. Now, this hollowness of the mold and the pouring the liquid hot iron, this was important to Walter Benjamin, and we're going to talk about Walter Benjamin because he introduces the next figure of Art Nouveau. We'll have like 3 different figures. One is the Octopus of Breton, the other is the Narcissus figure of Dolf Sternberger, and now what we're discussing now is the Olympia figure of and Olympia. We'll discuss who Olympia is. The Olympia figure of Walter Benjamin, and he does that via steps. We're like in the middle of the book of the famous Passagenwerk, the Arcades project. We're not going to completely discuss the Arcade project, but it is important to understand that Walter Benjamin had a very, very ambiguous relationship to Art Nouveau, also to the late 19th century. I think his whole heart was with the 19th century, and his whole heart was with the arcades and how the arcades sort of created urban interiors. Right, we were talking about the interior of the house, but the arcade is really the interior of a city. It's like a reverse of a street. It's like the street becomes an interior. It's a beautiful idea, and it's also when you look at the plans of Paris and you see, you understand like what the avenues are, because the avenues and the boulevards are a system of seeing. Right, they were built by Baron Haussmann. It's a military strategy to prevent like the revolutionary masses to occupy the streets. That's the whole reason why the boulevards are so wide. So you will see that structure of the boulevards, and then crisscrossing through the black blocks are these arcades suddenly. And of course they're commercial, and they introduce us to the world of world capitalism, as Sloterdijk would say. But they are this immediately. They occupy this sort of a solid space of the urban block, and in that sense they're completely dark. Not in the literal sense, but they're like occupying almost the stone of the block itself by crisscrossing, traversing in French, traverser, crisscrossing from one side to the other. So it's not part of the street system. It's not part of your typical day-lit system of perspective. So you're entering a sort of dream world already. It's not at all like a shopping mall, or it's quite different, and it's always like very Gothic in its section. It's almost like a nave. It's very vertical, and then we got all the shops at the bottom. At the ground floor, and that's filled with Art Nouveau shops and the dressing of shops, and so that's sort of what's given, and that was the real interest of Walter Benjamin. It's like, how do these masses, how do these flaneurs actually crisscross through those spaces, and what type of mental state, often referring to Charles Baudelaire, of course, but in this case also to Nietzsche's Zarathustra. And it's very interesting how he sees Zarathustra. He's not discussing the content of it at all, but much more the rhythm of the book. I remember looking up how many exclamation marks there are in also Sprach Zarathustra, and there's over 1,000 of them. So it's a very exclamatory book. And their pauses. It has a very strong rhythm, and Walter Benjamin tries to understand these pauses as a whole form, as a hollow form, the power of the predominance of the hollow form over the filled form. Now he never links that directly to the Formwerk in German. Actually, a mold is a form, so it's not a filled form, but a hollow form, negative form. He never discusses that, but he does, of course, discuss Jugendstil, which is the German word for Art Nouveau, as something that tries to link itself to technology and new technologies. And that goes via the hollow form or via the mold, right? And we'll discuss the word aura, of course. Jugendstil forces forciert das auratische, the auratic. We'll discuss the aura all at the end of this lecture. But there is an observation which is really correct and that's my issue with Walter Benjamin. He has fabulous observations, especially for Art Nouveau. But he's always, of course, it's critique, right? For him, it's always critical. It's always ideological. He's really a modernist who believes in transparency and proper structure, seeing through the structure, and from that point of view, and that's really his mind. His mind is with modernism. His heart is with Art Nouveau. That's how we should put it. And then he looks from that point of view at Art Nouveau, at Jugendstil. Jugendstil is the second attempt on the part of art to come to terms with technology. The first attempt was realism. That's already very interesting. There's the problem was more or less present in the consciousness of artists who were uneasy about the new process of technological reproduction. So it is a form of I'm not sure if the idea of art is important. Of course, for Walter Benjamin it is, because art tries to get a grip on this idea of the aura, of the shining. It's a form of radiance of the object. And Art Nouveau, as he says, Jugendstil no longer saw itself threatened by the competing technology. So it is a form of architecture coming from art, and tries to sort of deal with technology. In his case, completely unsuccessfully. In my view, far more successful than in his understanding. And he even quotes Adolf Loos at the end, right? So Adolf Loos, the author of Ornament und Verbrechen, Ornament and Crime, which is really this is really the horror of modernism. It's like the dropping of ornament, and we'll get to some positions of this. Now, here we get to Olympia. Let's do this in steps. Again, about the hollow space here at the top, but now discussing the mysticism of Maeterlinck, a Flemish author who seeks to deflect this pressure, but hence also the reception of technological forms in Jugendstil. For example, the hollow space. So the reception of technological forms, the hollow space. So that notion of the hollow space is really important to him, and we'll see it return later. Now, the extreme point in the technological organization of the world, we're in the middle now, is the liquidation of fertility. Liquidierung in German. Now, that word is has a double meaning. It's of course it means the destruction or the negation of fertility, but it also means the liquefying, right? So it's not an unambiguous term. We have to take care of that. That idea of liquefying, and he connects it to frigidity. So we get like fertility, and now we get the frigid woman. So that's the figure of Art Nouveau. The frigid woman embodies the ideal of beauty in Jugendstil. Jugendstil sees in every woman not Helena, but Olympia. Helena, but not Olympia. So that's his argument. Now, for everybody who doesn't know who Olympia is, it refers to the story of the Sandman, der Sandman, from E.T.A. Hoffmann, an early 19th century author who wrote this story of a man, Nathaniel, who falls in love with a very mysterious woman, Olympia, who's playing the harpsichord like perfectly. And when he talks to her, when he asks her questions, she always gives the same answer. And she's a perfect dancer, almost in the sense of Kleist. She's a perfect dancer, and with all the moves like in perfect order. And he falls in love with her. He falls in love with her until the moment when he sees that Olympia is taken apart because she's actually an automaton. She's an automaton, and they're taking the eyes out and dismembering the legs and everything. So, and it's an absolute shock, obviously, to Nathaniel. So that's the for Walter Benjamin, that's the figure of Art Nouveau, and I think there's something double in it. And not just the ambiguity of the word liquidierung, liquidation, because I think that's actually correct in its sense of that it immediately and fully Art Nouveau fully relies on softness and weakness and liquidity. So that's really central to the creation of Art Nouveau. So yes, there's a completely correct understanding of what Art Nouveau is, and Olympia sort of is this automaton in the sense of a mimetic figure. So that, well, of course, Art Nouveau uses this weakness or liquidity as a strategy, as a technological strategy to create forms of mimesis. I wouldn't say to imitate, but forms of mimesis. And there, the automaton, which is both a technological figure as well as a mimetic figure. So that's, I think, is completely correct in understanding what Art Nouveau tries to do by connecting the liquid and technology. But I say no to this idea of the frigid. This is really quite a misunderstanding of what Art Nouveau tries to do, and he's even quoting Weininger with his als ob philosophy, the philosophy of the as if. That's Jugendstil's little death knell, Benjamin says, but it is actually the reverse. It's this hollow shape, which is extremely productive. And I think that you will see that all the time with Benjamin. It's this hollowness, everything that disappears in this hollow form, to die and to be copied and to be made into zombies and perfect reproductions. But he doesn't see that actually that hollow form is producing transformations and transmutations and flourishings and flowerings. And I think that is a pure fertility. It's quite the reversal. It's not of course, obviously, it's not a natural form of procreation. It's a machine like what would Butler say? A machinate form of fertility. They call it a machinate. He was talking about machinate mammals. And machine ecology, we would call it a machine ecology or machinate ecology. At least it's this vampiro-toothic culture, this world of non-human procreation and artificial insemination. It's in that sense it's far beyond modernism. It tries to understand technology not as a machinery to create the same all over. Yes, it's doing that, but that's not the nature of technology. Its nature is really to be productive, and I think that's what's so powerful about Art Nouveau, and Walter Benjamin is really a moralist of modernism. It's really it hurts to say it's an incredibly talented and intelligent author and with an incredibly good taste for these type of worlds that were created by Art Nouveau and by Charles Baudelaire and figures like Poe and Nietzsche. But he always distances himself and takes an ideological point of view, or from a Marxist point of view. And I think that's really what the power of surrealism is. Also, he loved surrealism until a point, and then he stops again and retreats, and then says, "Okay, instead of like this world of and here we get a surrealist actually discussing Art Nouveau. He always distances himself and says, yeah, that this surrealism doesn't take this transparent viewpoint of the modern. And what's so funny here, it's in Spanish, modernismo is actually not what we call modernism, but it's Art Nouveau. So modernismo was for instance, was a term to describe the work of Antoni Gaudí. And really the best article in this edition of Minotaur, I think it's issue 3 and 4, December 1933, is by Salvador Dalí, and it's titled De la beauté terrifiante et comestible de l'architecture moderne style. So it's about the terrifying and edible beauty of Art Nouveau architecture. This is actually fantastic. Surrealism is extremely anti-modernist. But we know from Breton, who despised the work of Corbusier, and right he was. They're really the theorists of. It's often said that surrealism doesn't have its own architecture. It has a form of painting, a bit of sculpture, but it didn't have any architecture. And that is true maybe for the 1930s and 40s, but absolutely not what happened before. So in that sense, Art Nouveau is an architecture without theory until we get surrealism. It's really surrealism that properly understands what Art Nouveau tries to do, and it's surrealism doesn't fit with modernism at all, though it overlaps in time. It's actually a belated theory of Art Nouveau in that sense. Modernism really a form of idealism and pure sort of mental transparency of the world. It's almost like pure ideology. You know, that they want to see through things. Modernists want to see through things. It's a world of transparency. They want to see through. Well, surrealism is absolutely the reverse. It accepts the opacity of things, and it accepts that power of opacity, which is really the power of the text of Salvador Dalí. And it is so perfect because. I think what surrealism understands about Art Nouveau is that every time it sort of reaches a plane of all possible images of things, and in their softness and also in their transformative technology. Of course, that's the obsession of Salvador Dalí with cheese and with sort of molten forms, and the forms of melting as well. And he goes really far with his interpretation of Art Nouveau. And the most beautiful sentence is in this page, where he looks at the specific shapes of cast iron. Not of Antoni Gaudí in this case, but of Hector Guimard. You see this, actually the lamppost is a detail of the lamppost in black and white we see over here. And he says that it's about a certain type of atavism. Il s'agit encore d'un atavisme métallique de l'Angélus de Millet. So let's look at this. So it's a metallic atavism. It's a metallic atavism. Atavism is normally used in a quite a negative, derogatory way, but it is a form of mimesis, or a form of engendering, I would say, and it's not so much a revival. It's not so much a revival, but a transformation and an engendering of what was forgotten or sort of suppressed genetically, and then sort of returns in a specific shape, often a mutative or a mutant shape, and this idea of atavism is quite strong in the sense that it gives us a sort of another idea of what Walter Benjamin would just call mechanical reproduction. It's not a mechanical reproduction at all. It's really a sort of transformative technique, and it's metallic. So, and why is that important? Because this idea of metal, in this case iron, being liquid and glowing, sort of produces in its technology this sort of a range of possible images that can be begot, or can be produced, or created out of the hollow form. And why is Dali's idea of the Angelus of Millet so powerful? Because look at this, you see two peasants. The Angelus is a prayer. It's a Marian prayer. So it's Hail Mary. I think Hail Mary occurs like a few times in that prayer. And I think it's actually said 3 times a day. So we see two peasants here, a man and a woman. And you see the church in the background, and they're saying their prayers. So it's noon probably. They're saying their prayers, and Dali suggested that in the basket would be their dead baby. That goes a bit far. But it is this idea of the Marian as a womb, as the Holy Virgin, obviously. So it is a form of immaculate conception. Beautiful idea. It's not a material. I think this is important to say. It's not a material conception of two bodies. It's really the light that proceeds through the Holy Virgin with like what the medieval saying was, like a ray of sunlight through the glass. So it's a form of not touching, or it's a detouring connection. It's a detouring connection in the sense of Flusser. It's an indirect connection, a connection without touching. And what is so? It's a form of absorptive mimesis, is what I would call absorptive. So look at the tilting heads of the two peasants in prayer, and the lamps of the lamppost, and their bent forms. So they're both in bent form. And then we have their hands, they are folded together in prayer, and we get the arms branching off, holding the signage. I don't think the basket is actually original Guimard, but the trash can would be. I think that's a modern addition, which would link to the basket. We shouldn't go that far, but so we got a form of mimesis. We got a form of a perfect copy, not in the sense of a direct imitation or representation, but as a transformation. So this is a metallic atavism of the Angelus of the painter Millet, which I think is 50 years before the metro entrance of Guimard. But what a powerful idea, and it's really this unnatural procreation of technology, this artificial insemination of an image in technology, and a technology of liquidity that allows for that image to be reproduced via some kind of ferro-vegetal transformation. So it's not an imitation of nature at all. It's like no plant looks like this. It's just crazy to say that the ambition of Art Nouveau is to imitate nature. It's not doing that at all. It wants to be unnatural, and it wants to be artificial. But it does understand nature as a set of forms. In this case, as a set of forms that reach beyond themselves into a state of imagery. I think that's really, and I think what's also important is that this is not just like any type of entrance, as if the architect would always design entrances like this. No, it's a subway entrance. So we get some kind of iron mobility below. We get an iron mobility here below, and a whole network of the Parisian metro, and which is has this outgrowth not of high tech or some kind of transparent notion of technology and elementarism. We get this sort of a dream coming out of being produced or being created by this liquid network. So in that sense, there's a connection between the forge and the subway, and this intensity and this addition of light is quite a perfect understanding by Guimard of this new technology, far beyond any sort of modernist interpretation of the new technologies of railway networks. The next step, the next figure, would lead us to Narcissus, which is, and it's really a pity that Dolf Sternberger, Über Jugendstil, is not translated. It's a really magnificent book, Jugendstil Begriffung Physiognomik. It's just one text after another, very, very beautiful, and it's very often translated by Walter Benjamin in the Passagenwerk, but it's so we only get like a few of the quotes of Sternberger through Walter Benjamin's translations. But he's very direct in saying that the central figure for him of Art Nouveau is Narcissus, and so what do we have? We have the Octopus of André Breton. We have Olympia of Walter Benjamin. We just keep those figures, and we add the third central figure of Dolf Sternberger, which is Narcissus, and quotes over it: "Amore sui inardescens Narcissus in florem transmutater." So I think that is a step extra, because it means a burning of self-love made Narcissus transform into a flower. So the burning self-love. Narcissus looking in the pond, but his reflection is not at the surface of the water. It's deep in the pond. We can see the middle of the water being in the middle of the painting. So it's not flat. It's deep. So we get this idea of absorptive mimesis, which we also encountered in von Kleist with the concave mirror. So we get the pond mirroring Narcissus. It's a very specific idea of mimesis, and sure, he dies, but through his death there's a transformation into a flower, and this is a beautiful idea of what type of mimesis, which Dali would completely understand. This idea of mimesis being transformative, transmutator. So it's a transmutating of Narcissus. The burning Narcissus, burning of self-love. I'm not sure if it's a self, because it's really a prosthetic He's holding hands with his own reflection. He's holding hands, so it's an extensive, a prosthetic notion of a mimesis, and that means it comes back as an absorption, and it's quite clear. Narcissus is absorbed. He is fixed on the vertical, and which is quite in contrast to, of course, to Olympia, who's self-moving. So what does he see? He sees an other. So there's a transformation of the self into another. It's not the extension of a self by staying the self, right? We know that already from Gregory Bateson, with the tree and the axe and the man cutting the tree. There's this constant self-othering cycle. And maybe that would be the best way of, because it's not about an identity. It's not a self and a self. It's a self and an other. Why would he fall in love with himself? So he's falling in love with somebody else, with an other. And that's both prosthetic, because it's a mirror, as well as mimetic, because it's a mirror. So we got these three figures are now deeply connected. We got mimesis, we got liquidity, we got sort of a technology of movement, of transformation, and love. So it's almost as if Olympia and Narcissus are two sides of the same coin. One is self-othering, and the other is self-moving. So there's a prosthetic aspect to the one, and there's a mimetic aspect to the other, and they sort of both fit in this looping effect. So it's about falling in love. So it's the same love as that of Nathaniel in the story of the Sandman, falling in love with Olympia. Nathaniel and Olympia would be Narcissus and Olympia, and that goes via a mimetic technology. So the technological aspect is as important as the mimetic aspect. So this goes completely against sort of the negative, and of course it's always with Benjamin. It's so problematic. This criticality just kills everything, and. Of course, he bases everything on his reading of Baudelaire, and but there's this misunderstanding of what Baudelaire tries to do and what Art Nouveau tries to do, and he has a lot of the figures completely correct. Quoting from La Mort des Amants. Nous aurons des lits pleins d'odeurs légères, des divans profonds comme des tombeaux. So this is typical. This is almost perfect Art Nouveau. This is the sofas, deep as tombs. So we would almost say the womb of the hollow space is as much the tomb of the sofa. It's the sofa that is so incredibly soft, and of course the technology of Art Nouveau is one of softness, where you sink away as a form of death, as a form of dying, and of course the womb, almost the reverse figure of that hollow space becoming productive and producing these transmutations. So let's look at because he has some beautiful ideas, Benjamin, and of course his most beautiful analysis of Art Nouveau is the textile analysis. It conceived the residence as a receptacle for the person, a receptacle, and it encased him with so deeply in the dwelling's interior that one might be reminded of the inside of a compass case, where the instrument with all its accessories lies embedded in a deep, usually violet folds of velvet. That's beautiful. So the house is like a velvet case with folds, a velvet case, where, of course, this metal instrument, the compass, is sort of lying in there. So again, we get the technology, the mold, the softness of the velvet. But for him, it's a burial, it's a coffin, and it's really it's really a pity, because it's correct. The image is correct. It's an understanding of Art Nouveau, and it has a strong relationship to death. Of course, we're in the period of decadence. It has a very strong relationship to death and beauty, and but there's this reversal. So what is the end? What is the end for Walter Benjamin? Is that everything dies there? Is actually essential for Dolf Sternberger as a moment of transmutation. This is almost like the transfiguration of Theseus with the Minotaur. Is this dying transformation and glowing and becoming new by transforming, and not by being exactly copied, but by being transformed, like an atavism, a metallic atavism, or a flower. In the case of Narcissus, so the tomb actually becomes a womb figure, a receptacle. It's not just like a coffin, but it's actually a form of production. But it does describe this sleeping effect. This is almost because it's a little bed as well. This velvet case. This sofa reminds me of it's almost the same period of Tolstoy. Tolstoy wrote his diaries, and so I'm thinking of sofas, and we're getting more sofas here. I wiped away the dust in my room, and walking around came to the divan, and I could not remember whether I had dusted it or not. Just because these movements are customary and unconscious, there we go again, I could not remember them if I felt, and it was impossible to do. So that if I dusted and forgot it, i.e. if I did an act unconsciously, then I just did the same as if it never existed. If someone unconscious saw it, then perhaps it could be restored. But if no one saw it, or saw it unconsciously, if the whole complex life of many people pass along unconsciously, then that life is as if it had never existed. So that life only exists then, when it is lit by consciousness. What then is this consciousness? What are the acts which are lit by consciousness? So that's a very powerful description, not just of a sofa, but of a house. We live life as if it never existed. And of course, this is again a sort of sense of death, and are we dying, and where does the light come from? Well, that light doesn't come from outside; it comes from inside out. I'm thinking also of Edgar Allan Poe's sofa. It's a very old text by Edgar Allan Poe, the philosophy of furniture, and it starts with a man lying on the sofa, also asleep, and dreaming his interior. And I think that's much closer to what Art Nouveau tries to do. And I'm also thinking of an image of Jean Baudrillard, who is a philosopher who passed away 15 years ago or something. Who was a very powerful thinker, but a thinker not so much relating to like existing philosophies, never referencing other philosophers, much more like looking through images. And he is a philosopher of Polaroids. He would call them Polaroids, and there's a whole set of these images. He published actually a lot of photos he took, but you can also see from his diaries, another set of diaries next to Tolstoy's Cool Memories. We got a lot of images. I remember a dead bird on the terrace, and man walking in dressed up as a chicken and things like that, or somebody embodying the crucifixion and walking around in an empty shopping mall, the parking lot of a shopping mall with a cross on his back. So that's typical for Baudrillard. These very powerful images, and this is a photo by him. He titled Sainte-Beuve. I think it's his own chair. The chair in his study, and I think it's a velvet chair with a velvet or with a red blanket. So it's red on red, and we see a lot of things here. It's almost like that the image of a house, or the image of the receptacle of Walter Benjamin. It's beautiful because. Of course, you use a chair, but what is sitting in a chair? This is you adapt your body to the chair, and so that's the receptacle as a mold. So in that sense, sitting in a chair is like you're being molded by the chair, or it is at least an exchange of imitation. I think Jacob van Exkel actually. Understood like the body in an environment as something that was like constantly following routines of mimesis, and so you would actually imitate the chair by sitting down. So it's not just simply use; it's a form of imitation, and the receptacle. It's a form of drapery. I think that's also important. You see drapery, and so it relates to ornament and the whole realm of textile. I think architects completely misunderstand sort of what a house actually is. I mean, they design the hard bits, but if you analyze a house all the way to, well, the most futile objects like a letter on a table, or the rings, or the coffee that the coffee cup left on the table, or a door ajar, or a towel on the counter, or you have these sort of totally futile elements, and on the other side you have sort of the hard bits. Then there is a whole range of materials in between, and of course on that futile side we get textile, we get pillows, we get carpets, we get curtains, we get like our beds. Just look at your bed when you come out of bed in the morning. You get this image, this impression, and that's what a house does. The house captures. It's a conjuring almost, like, because that's also obvious. It's also an image of death, of your absence, but as a spirit, as something that's conjured up by the house, as an image, because you see the figure, you see in this negative, all the hard pleats in this mirror, this soft mirror of the chair and the blanket. You see that figure that's set there. So yes, it is about activity and how we use a house. It's about ornament and drapery and the soft materials, but it's also about death and absence, and that's a very interesting idea, a notion of what a house is, and that's of course what we see in the notes, in the short notes on the dusting of the sofa by Tolstoy. It's like how present am I? And so that's the power of Baudrillard's its image or photo. It's like this trying to understand what inhabiting is, and it's really about this transformation. So it's not just a machine of habits. Machine à habiter, right? Habiter, Corbusier's construction. No, it's much more this transformation of habit into spirits, into images, and well, that's what Art Nouveau adds. All these pleats and nymphs and fairies, and it's this whole world of being dreamed up or being conjured up. So. In that sense, the house is really a double house. It's really your double. in the sense of the doppelganger, but in the sense of an other as well. It's not just you. That's what's so haunting about it. It's you as an other. So it's both again prosthetic and mimetic. I think that's what the idea is. And I think we need to contrast this notion of inhabiting, which of course in German is wohnen. Wohnen relates to Gewohnheit. So Heidegger's wohnen is always translated as dwelling, but it should be translated by inhabiting, because it's wohnen relates to Gewohnheit, which is a habit. And for Heidegger, it stops there. All things around us disappear under this sort of blanket of or this curtain of Dienlichkeit, of service, right? So that the house serves you, and by serving you, it disappears. So that I think I already talked about this earlier, but it's when Heidegger enters the lecture room, he opens the door by the klinke, by the latch, by the doorknob, and opens the door without any consciousness. And for him, it ends there. There's no that's how being relates to beings via Zuhandenheit, via this sort of disappearing of things. And Art Nouveau does exactly the reverse. Let's just look at this is not what we normally call Art Nouveau, but the wallpaper of William Morris is strongly related. There's not a very strong streak of Art Nouveau architecture in England, because they had arts and crafts thanks to John Ruskin and people like William Morris. They were much more interested in the craft side, also coming out of Gothic revival. There's not this full transformation of architecture that we see in France and Belgium, and also bits of Germany and Czechia. But William Morris that's fantastic, and especially on that level of wallpaper and wall hangings. And we need to now understand it's like what these are, and I think that's actually very important, because we think of ornament. We've trained to understand ornament as a visibility, even as something that's fun or that uplifts the atmosphere of the room, or does anything of those sorts. So it's really part of the phenomenal world in that analysis. And often architects that have a phenomenological understanding of their work try to add pattern of a natural pattern, but I'm normally not going as far as this. But this, of course, is understood in the visual realm, and it's true when you visit an Art Nouveau house. You walk around and you look around, and you act as if you're in a museum. Now, that's really the worst way of understanding Art Nouveau. Of course, when you're a visitor, you see things for the first time, and you bend over them, you pick them up maybe, and you look at their patterns and the colors, and maybe even an analysis, and you see things. But that's not what inhabiting is. Visiting is not inhabiting, and we're talking about what Tolstoy is doing here. About not seeing things. So how is it possible that we get a world of not seeing things? And I'd say Heidegger would completely understand this note, this diary note by Tolstoy, because that's for him that's Zuhandenheit, that's a not seeing, and how would it be possible then to link that to ornament and a wall that is so strongly patterned and ornamented and adorned and sweetened by William Morris, and that goes by inhabitation. that goes by inhabitation. So what you have to understand by Art Nouveau is that they're not looking at the patterns. They're actually having their breakfast, and they're having conversations, and they're watering their plants, and they're smoking cigars, and they're doing what we all do. By not seeing the teapot while they pick it up, and by not seeing the wallpaper that is looking at them, and not seeing the vases that hold their flowers. So we got a double world. We got a world of seeing, not seeing. We have this inhabiting not of walls that retreat, as in Heidegger's understanding of the ledge, but that actually appear, that come toward us. But that coming toward us creates an appearance that we inhabit the appearance. So that's exactly what happens here. It's the pleating, not as a folding, but as drapery, as ornament that we inhabit, and creates a double house of conjuring up, of us being conjured up by patterns. And that's a completely different understanding of inhabitation, because there's the transfer, not of a hand directly on the ledge, but a hand detouring via the image that is really radiated by things. So and I think that's really also the so powerful in surrealism, that it understands this technology as something that creates a plane of images, or sort of slipping of things that we can then enter, but now fully enter by almost like by a not touching, not by a grasping or understanding of things, but really by linking to their images. So it is a form of not touching. So what we have this power of things, of radiating, and we have our inhabiting by not seeing. Heidegger's ontology moves away from the phenomenal, and while phenomenology moves away from things, because it grasps only their appearances, we now have sort of a middle. We have a middle that says both, accepts the not seeing and the unconscious life, as well as the appearing of things. But obviously the appearing of things not in our minds, but as an appearing by themselves, which is a radical difference. So that's what this pattern is. It's a mental inhabitation. It's a mental inhabitation. So it's like via images, and via this liquidity, and via these spirits. I would like to just link that to another technology. It's often discussed in the sphere of automatism. And robotics and responsive environments. This story of J.G. Ballard of 1963, I believe, published later in a bundle of short stories titled Vermilion Sands. And this is The Thousand Dreams of Stella Vista. Vermilion Sands is actually the suburb that has in it a set of houses that are called by Ballard, and Ballard, let's not forget, he calls himself a surrealist, and there's this house. It's called a psychotropic house, a PT house, and there's a couple, Howard Talbot and his wife Faye, that are looking for a nice PT house, and they find an older one. It's a beautiful story. I can't go through the whole story, but it's only like 10 or 12 pages. The PT house the house is transformable. Not the whole house, but just parts of the house, like certain walls and ceilings and certain parts of the house are actually flexible. They're made of plastics. It's called plastics. So the idea of liquidity now proceeds all the way through the material. There's no hardening at the side of the inhabitant, and it's made of plastics. And the house tracks your behavior with sensocells. So again, we get this idea of mimesis and molding. So there's a technology that can actually make an imprint of you and your behavior and the behavior of your co-inhabitants. And that house is older, and the previous inhabitant was a movie star called Gloria Tremaine. And Gloria Tremaine went mad, and she killed her architect husband. We don't know the name, and don't remember the name anymore. But there's a lot of architects always in embellished stories, and they're always like on the wrong side. So this one gets killed. And the house has imprinted Gloria. In the meanwhile, Gloria has died, and Howard and his wife buy the house, and they start to live there. And of course, you can imagine we get a relationship between Howard and Gloria. So the house is like responding, changing the environment smoothly and warmly and kindly, according to. Via the sensocells and the character impression that the house took on from the molding and the behavior of Gloria Tremaine. And of course, because Gloria was mad, the house at a certain a moment, well, I think I have to say in between, that Faye became jealous and ran out of the house. Here, this is actually the first publication of the story. I don't remember the magazine. I think it's British. You see sort of a drawing of Gloria emerging from this liquid soup as an image. And actually here Howard is running out of the house. Why? Because Gloria starts to harass and become very, very possessive and so possessive, and actually I think Beller describes the house as an attack, but also as a grand mal, as an epileptic episode. So and that's where the story ends. Howard runs out of the house, and at a certain moment he puts off the machinery and dreams of like maybe putting it on again, activating the machine of Gloria. Now, there's a lot to discuss, but we won't do that. It's clear that there's a relationship with Olympia. It's clear there's a relationship with softness. There's this the softness of Art Nouveau is now extremely developed. So we get this psychedelic drawing next to the drawing used by was it almost 50 years later by André Breton, by a surrealist science fiction writer. But what's really interesting is this notion of a house almost inhabiting itself and being a double. And I think that's also where the house fails. It has imprinted, it has imitated the behavior of the previous inhabitant, but it's not doing that with the current inhabitant. So that's sort of what it's not prosthetic in the sense that it listens to the behavior of Howard and his wife, and it's not returning a mimetic image. It's creating this extreme other. So that other is interesting. That it's not like like Alexa, which is Amazon's Gloria or Olympia. It's not like Alexa, which tries to sort of constantly serve you. And with this idea of Alexa talking to the refrigerator, shouldn't you like order new groceries, or shouldn't you order pizza because they're coming home like quickly, or that's the idea of Alexa is this ultimate comfort. this ultimate comfort. And this is really sort of the dark side of this idea of the sofa as deep as tombs, which is really the idea of comfort. And that's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about that sort of other side, like transforming and transmutating. And that's exactly where Ballard gets it right. It's not like a responsive environment in the sense that you fully control and that the thing is only an extension of the self as a form of self-control. No, it's actually a transformation in an other, and then becomes an image. Right, it's not just a system. Actually, I think that's the power of the story of J.G. Ballard, is that the house actually becomes an apparition and shows this double. And that's, of course, there's this. I think this is actually an image from exactly the same year. This is an image by Rainer Benham and François Delagré, I think. I think an article, a home is not a house. But this is this image of technology. This is all the technology of a house, but then being almost as a transparency. So this is the nightmare of modernism. Right, so where the transparency stops and then you see all the surface. So this is like showing all the butlers and slaves, and of course there's a whole history you can write for architecture of the house, especially of the house of the domus, becoming like the image of domination and domestication of the master of the house and the slave. You could write this whole story according to Hegel. Right, lordship and bondage, and that relationship always being ambiguous. Right, so always like these servants, like creating a mold, a transformative image of the master. It's not just the master having full control. It's also this image of the warped mirror. This transformative image of the perfect butler. What is your life? What is your life when just before you get hungry, the meal is served, or just before you get thirsty, the whiskey is served, your glass of whiskey, even if in the right brand. So that means that the butler has taken over your life by a perfect mimesis. So that's what the domus is always spooked by, this other, by this double house, by this idea of doubling. And even when there's no butlers, when there's just like perfect technology, which is always behind the walls, and architects call this space behind the walls poché. And the poché is always the hollow wall. It's not solid walls. We draw them as solid, right? Poché normally means that the architects draw it as solid, but it's hollow. And there's often like little corridors in there for the servants, or there's air conditioning, there's plumbing, there's the sewage, and from every horror movie that the aliens are coming through the air conditioning, through the sewage, through its sewage system, and behind the walls. There's this haunting. The haunting of the domus is always this doubled space, and so that's a technological space. But what's interesting is not the phenomenology. What's interesting is that this world of imagining of ghosts or aliens coming through the wall or through the air conditioning or the ghost coming through the sewage system is actually that of a technological space. It's again technology. It's not our minds, It's not our humanity that creates imagination. It's the connection between the human and technology. It's the technological space, that matrix, that space, that hollow space that creates these images. I think that's, if you want to write a history, a Hegelian history of the domus, of the house, it has to be this haunting back and forth of two sides of the house, of the served and the servant. Louis Kahn would say, of the served and the servant. And what's so beautiful in Bellet's story is that this servant is being reversed. There's already a movie, I think it's also a book, The Servant, where the servant actually takes over the household of the master, and the master becomes completely passive. Of course, there's all the nightmare of comfort, that everything happens to you and you're served, and you get your food and everything, while your weight is increasing till you die. Of course, we know these images of extremely obese people in a world that's almost like an intensive care unit. So that's this beautiful image of Rainer Benham, and of course he means it in the sense of responsive, and I think in that sense Ballard is really advanced beyond Benham, right? Much more interesting. Instead of just us giving us control over the technology of the house, it's actually the technology of the house that doesn't control us, but actually gives us an image back that reaches this level of imagery, right? So what we first have is like, okay, there's the master and the servant, and technology gives you everything you need, right? That's Heidegger's Dienlichkeit, the serviceability, everything you need by standing behind the curtain like a lackey. And then there's Rainer Benham that says, yes, but we need more control with this responsive environment. It needs actually to listen to us better instead of just giving us what we want. Then there's Ballard that says, yes, but on that reflective image, we have a transformation going on. There's actually a depth. There's a depth to this reflective image that allows that technology to explore its own images, and that's really a surrealist analysis of technology that then gives you an other in return, and that's exactly where the gift cycle and grace occur. So it's a very powerful idea of Ballard. I think if architects ever want to pick up the ideas of Ballard, they should not think in a responsive environment as something that serves, nor as something that's completely alienating. I think that's where Ballard's story goes off the rails, is when it completely alienates and you have to put it off. It needs to find some kind of balance. A balance, of course, between Narcissus and Olympia, but that would be sort of an understanding of what this living ornament, this soft mirror of the house would be. I just want to add a few more images of the psychotropic. It's not by accident that the idea of the medium and the mediumistic and spiritism have led us to the psychotropic, to the PT house. So we do want to explore the ideas of the psychotropic. This is much later. The drawing on the right is by Henri Michaud. Henri Michaud did a lot of experiments with mescal, or mescaline as it was later called. And what's interesting about Henri Michaud is that this is another drawing where you see these sort of types of radiant figures. They're not colored, but you see lots of detail, exactly what André Breton was talking about, and sort of patterned figures in black and white, and always lots of repetitions with little centers and little ejections. In this case, it's quite like a perspective of a river. But I think what really interests me is this term over here, ornamentogenesis, and we will see that more and more, and it's quite a riddle. Because these worlds of induced numbness and actually using the numbness and the unconscious to actually create a whole realm of spectral images, what you would call spectral images, very similar to the bioluminescence of the octopus, but also similar to the White Lady of Bernadette Soubirous, and of course the surrealist images. we get this understanding of the visions. Right, so it's really a return, having visions from that side of numbness and unconscious, and then seeing the images. And these images have very specific rhythms and very specific type of details. So details within a detail, says Henri Michaud. And that's almost exactly André Breton, but with a Breton, it's automatic drawing. So it's not psychotropic. It's via spiritism. Here it's about taking certain doses of mescaline, and now we get a whole set of such observations by specific authors. So on the left, of course, Walter Benjamin, his Protocols of Drug Experiments, his book on hashish, and he's speaking about the aura. And let me just quote because the aura is, of course, a very important term in Walter Benjamin, and it's been taken up in art history and the theory of art. But the word aura really comes from his experiments with hashish. And so here we go. These statements concern the nature of aura. Everything I said on the subject was directed polemically against the Theosophists, who actually sometimes make drawings color drawings of auras, whose inexperience and ignorance are found highly repugnant. So this is Walter Benjamin again, and it's like super critical. Instead of being grateful that Theosophists come up with this concept of the aura, no, it's repugnant. And I contrasted three of the genuine aura, though not by means schematically, with the conventional banal ideas of the Theosophists. First, genuine aura appears in all things. That's a beautiful way of saying it. Not just in certain kinds of things, as people imagine. Second, the aura undergoes changes, which can be quite fundamental. With every movement, the aura-wreathed object makes. So aura is a wreath already. Third, genuine aura can in no sense be thought of as a spruced-up version of magic rays beloved of spiritualists and described and illustrated in vulgar works of mysticism. On the contrary, the characteristic feature of genuine aura is ornament, an ornament halo. Okay, what's this? So in German we get ornamentale Umzirkung. Umzirkung means a radial construct. So it's ornament as it's almost Gustave Moreau's paintings, right, where you see the head of John the Baptist with this beautiful, like, circular aura around it, this halo. Of course, it's a halo. So a shining as much as an intricate construct that has a radial pattern. So what do we have here? An extreme experience of an aura being linked to ornament. And let me just jump to Aldous Huxley, who's quoting from Weir Mitchell. Weir Mitchell is a neurologist. So Huxley is writing this in the early 50s, and Weir Mitchell, I think, is the 1890s, 1896 or something. And his entry into that world, so his is Weir Mitchell. He's quoting from Weir Mitchell. And into that world, he saw a host of star points and what looked like fragments of stained glass. Then came delicate floating films of color. These were displaced by an abrupt rush of countless points of white light sweeping across a field of vision. Next there were zigzag lines of very bright colors which somehow turned into swelling clouds of still more bright hue. So, and then he goes on with buildings and Gothic towers, elaborate design, and again ornament. So we get this link here with Gothic stained glass. Here we get a link of with ornament halo. We get more Huxley. Now, not Heaven and Hell. The previous quote was from Heaven and Hell. Beautiful book. This is from The Doors of Perception. let me see. It's like glowing everywhere. The books, for example, with which my study were lined, like the flowers, they glowed when I looked at them with brighter colors, with prouder significance. Red books like rubies, emerald books, books bound with white jade, books of agate, books of aquamarine, of yellow topaz, lapis lazuli books. So what do we have? We have this connection again between jewelry, and he makes that all the time, this connection between jewelry, gems, the faceting of them, the glowing of them, the depth of their colors. So again, things behaving like screens, things radiating, in this case under the influence of, again, mescaline. But a direct connection between ornament and extreme experiences of seeing patterns and vision coming out of numbness. Actually, it's seeing almost vision itself. Things glowing and being brighter. And of course, this is a sense of jewelry that we already met with Hephaestus and the Daedala, not in their cunning but in their shining. The golden robots, the silver dogs. There's constantly this world of anointed bodies, anointed hair, locks of hair, creating a sense of charis, which is grace really sort of radiating from things by transfiguration. That's actually what we find in Huxley. Words like grace and transfigurations came to my mind, and his, of course, was what, among other things, they stood for. So it's a world of transcendence, obviously, but it's not just us transcending. It's the things transcending. It's not a phenomenology of mescaline. It's not a phenomenology. It's much closer to surrealism, where things sort of create a plane around themselves, a radiant plane, filled. Of course, I always described it as blurred and je ne sais quoi. But there is a glowing and a mixture, a blending of images where you can pick images out and saying, okay, it is a flower, or it is a gem, or it is this or that, or that, of a transference, an incandescence that becomes a set of images, almost like a film of images that allows them to transform and transfigure. The most beautiful version, of course, is what we find here in Dante, and this is the third book, the Paradiso, of course, where everything turns into light. We are very close to Dante with Beatrice right next to him, guiding him to the Empyrean, where it's just like circles of light and angels of light in circles, different spheres. And now we've passed through the last sphere, and just before we enter all the full light, we get this very similar vision. And I saw a light that took a river's form, light flashing reddish gold between two banks painted with wonderful spring flowerings, always flowers and gems. Out of that stream there issued living sparks, which settled on the flowers on all sides, like rubies set in gold, and then, as if intoxicated with the odors, that's almost like Baudelaire, they again plunged into the amazing flood, and as one spark sank, the other spark emerged. So we got this like going back and forth, this flickering that we know from migraine and from epilepsy. That we shouldn't make this a pathology. This is really a construct. This is really a construct of extension, becoming an other, and an other having visions of returning it. This prosthetic mimetic cycle. He actually goes so far to actually bend the river. Of course, we are behind the circles now. So, but as my eyelids eaves drank drank off that wave. So again, this sense of drinking and imbibing and incorporation. It seemed to me that it had changed its shape, no longer straight. That flow now formed around. So we get now the river is not an object anymore. It's actually becoming a figure. It's like turning into itself. Aldous Huxley related to the Ramayana. Again, golden lotuses, rivers by the thousands full of leaves of the color of sapphire and lapis lazuli. There we go again. So golden beds of red lotus. And so it's flowers again, gold, precious metals, precious stones, always shining like a screen. This is actually from Oliver Sacks when he discusses altered states in his book on hallucinations. And Oliver Sacks has always been interested in this. Oliver Sacks, the neurologist, passed away a few years ago. And he's always been interested in these visions. Already in his migraine book, beautiful illustrations of zigzags and gaps in vision and changing colors. And we know from his autobiography, which he published, was published after his death, that he experimented with extremely with psychotropic drugs. He has a great interest in this, almost like the same like William James. And again, we get this whole idea of linking these visions to ornament. And I'm writing here ornament and transcendence. I should write a paper, ornament and transcendence. Let's try to read my own handwriting. The real question becomes, it's really a mess. Why does architectural ornamentation evoke these states in everyday settings? And I think that's really the question. It's like, because it's the idea is not to have a psychotropic house. It's or to have a house where you're completely absent, or you have a house to eat your breakfast and your dinner and go to the bathroom and all these completely everyday things. Fill a cup with coffee and do the washing and do the vacuum cleaning and all that. All these everyday actions and activities in this realm of ornament. So that's the construct. If it's true that these extreme experiments with the human mind, let's not forget, these are technical experiments. These are pharmaceutical experiments. Seeing those extreme images. If you then have those images on the wall, like the William Morris or any other type of Art Nouveau wallpaper, it's like, how does that then relate to those everyday actions? Because you're not tripping, you're actually eating your dinner. And I think that's the whole magic of the domus. That's the whole magic of this house, of the double house, of this Narcissian house that Dolf Sternberger describes. It's this inhabiting of the walls transcending, which actually allows you to move and inhabit by not seeing them. So you're actually not seeing them. You're behaving in them. So in a sense, you're working them out. It's not a relationship of object and subject, or where you actually see a pattern, but you're actually acting in that pattern. So it's really a vision action, set of transformations, a flickering. That would allow us to understand ornament far better than let's say the postmodernist idea of joy or fun or or any other understanding of ornament as something of the phenomenal. This is really about how we live with patterns, and not how we stop and look at them. The idea is not to stop in front of your wall and then look at the patterns. Actually, the idea is to walk along your pattern, to move along. So again, we get this transference of shining, of appearing, and movement. I think this is where we end the lecture. Thank you very much.